Hello guys, my literature review is about understanding the ethical leadership and decision-making approaches of school leaders under supervision of Dr. Paize, November 28, 2021. I think I have referred to my real intention of choosing ethical leadership and decision-making multiple times. As a reminder, I should say that I have been principal for years, and during the years of being principal, I perceived that the most significant duty for a principal is making decisions correctly. I remember when the king of our country collapsed, the interviewers asked him about the reason, and he confessed that the reason was the wrong decisions that he made, and especially during the last days of his kingdom, the last years of his kingdom. My assistant and my colleagues are principal now, and they permanently send me text via WhatsApp or other social medias and ask me questions. And when I evaluate their questions, they are mostly related to the decision-making situations. For example, the last one was about the conflict between a principal and her assistant, and she asked me what to do with her assistant, who always try to intervene every issue which is beyond her task. And I asked her, what do you decided to do? And she told me that actually she made me so crazy that I prefer to knock her down, and I prefer to knock her down with my box, you know? And I imagined that moment. Oops. Okay. Uh, you know, another principal asked me about what to do with the educators that refuse to use a new software for teaching, and even all of them accompany with each other to resist against using the software. And the issue was with devolution and blah, 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 blah. You know, these are some of the reasons I have chosen the ethical leadership and decision making as my literature review. The moral and ethical background of a principal has a positive impact on the ethical behavior of students, educators, and staff, and contribute to create a peaceful environment. Ethical leadership and decision-making represent to be one of the most critical characteristics required for school leaders, particularly those who wish to create a positive school climate that engenders peace. To overcome the challenges of workplace, the principal need to have a framework for their decision-making behavior. They need ethical decision. Leaders needed to have an ethical framework to draw from when making decisions that apply to specific and appropriate action. Prior to talking about the ethical decision-making frameworks, I defined some initial terms. Every principal wishes to have a peaceful school environment without any conflict or crisis. As Adekola conveyed, every principal has her or his own values, morals, and ethics, and principals regularly decide upon their values and ethics. Values are intention behind actions, what we have learned from our parents, teachers, society, religion. They really help leaders to form their ethical framework. Ethics are cognition of moral choices, why one would consider an action good or bad. They are moral duties and somehow obligations. In 1970s and 1980s, interest in moral dimension of education and administration rise, and scholars like Hodgkins, Foster, Greenfield focused on the need for a framework for educational leadership. Starrett was the first scholar who considered and actually defined three, three paradigms for ethical leadership. He defined the ethic of critique, the ethic of care, and the ethic of justice. Later, Shapiro and Stankiewicz added ethical profession to the previous three paradigms of Starrett. Shapiro and Stankiewicz recognized Starrett's three ethical paradigms and added the ethical profession. The ethical profession saw professional ethics as a dynamic process where administrators use their own experiences and expectations of their work to develop their own personal and professional codes of practice. So finally, the ethical paradigms of educational leadership considered as the ethic of justice, care, critique, community, and profession. They provided educators with a framework to help them solve real-life and complex dilemmas they were confronted. Ethic of justice develops interaction between ethical learning and curriculum, and encourage discussion of individual choices and discussion of community choices. Ethic of justice included the terms participation, equal access, due process, policy formation, implementation, assessment, rights, responsibilities, and resource allocation. Social justice issues increase need for being kind, telling the truth, keeping promise, being fair, respecting others, and doing the right thing. Ethic of care focused on corporate and people, not on policies. Neil Noddings believed that ethic of care is something beyond natural care, and it is something comes not out of love, but out of duty. And everyone should take care of others at the time of choosing between self-care and people's care. She believed one should adhere to people care. The ethic of critique actually focused on administrators to face the moral issue of power and hierarchy. The ethic of critique was tied to critical thinking, which challenges the ways things were structured and uncovered, which group had advantage over the other groups. Ethics included sexist ethics of critique, included sexist of language, structured bias in workplace, racial bias in education, preservation of powerful group, and the democratic forced administrators to face the moral issues of privilege of some groups and failing of other groups. The ethical profession asked about what an educator should consider the best interest for students, and educators should empower themselves with knowledge and skills to contribute to the students in the best way. The ethic of community involved in communal. This ethic focused on community versus individuals and led decision-making from individuals toward communal. The ethic of community reinforced the ethics of justice, critique, and care, focusing on responsibility of administrators to engage in communal process to inform decision-making. This view moves the focus of ethics within the school from individual to communal. As I referred in my first slide, principals are confronted a lot of different kind of dilemmas. Dempster and Berry argued principles, responses, and their lack of sufficient preparation to deal with ethical decisions they faced, and deficit of attention to the ethical preparation of school leaders and their application to decision-making suggest that they lost to navigate this minefield blindfolded. I have focused on 5 questions and I tried to narrow the field of my study, and so I devoted my study to special school administrators. And my questions are: what does Texas special school administrators perceived about ethical leadership, and actually what is the perception of administrators about ethical leadership? And what is the role of school leaders in applying ethical educational leaderships and ethical decision-making in Texas special schools? And according their perception about ethical leaderships, how are they successful to use their and apply this ethical leadership in their workplace? And the third one is: what are the dilemmas surrounding ethical leadership practices in Texas special schools? And dilemmas is very important and maybe the most important task the leaderships are confronted to overcome them. And my first question is: how do dilemmas surrounding the implementation of ethical leadership directly impact the leadership practice of Texas special school leaders? And the last one: what might and should inform ethical guidelines and standards of professional conduct in special high schools? I really appreciate Dr. Paisley's patience, resistance, kindness, a sense of responsibility, and her knowledge. And I really appreciate Dr. Paisley, who enhanced my writing ability and taught me how to write literature review and even dissertation, and made me powerful in doing them. Thank you very much.